The man standing on my porch looked like a ghost. His fancy suit, the one he always wore for town hall meetings, was wrinkled and dusted with a fine layer of brown dirt. His face, usually smug and smiling for the local newspaper, was cracked like the dry earth all around us. For a full minute, he just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. This was Bartholomew Vance, the mayor of Harmony Creek. He was also the man who had called me a fool in front of the entire town, the man who divorced me because my dreams were too dirty for his clean, political hands. He was the last person I ever expected to see begging at my door. My name is Tammy Beggs, and I am 45 years old. The woman Bartholomew remembered was a quiet, heartbroken wife who cried when he called her farm Tammy's Folly. That woman was long gone. The sun and the soil had baked a new strength into my skin, and my hands, though calloused, could now build or break things with equal ease. He was looking at me like he didn't recognize me, and in a way, he didn't. I wasn't his wife anymore. I wasn't the town joke. I was the woman standing between him and a town that was dying of thirst. A town he was supposed to be leading. The mockery had started 5 years ago, right after my grandfather passed and left me this 100-acre plot of land. Bartholomew, then just a councilman with big ambitions, laughed when I said I was going to farm it. "Farm what, Tammy?" he'd bellow at town meetings, getting a good laugh from the crowd. "There's nothing but rocks and clay out there. You couldn't grow a weed if you tried." He used my inheritance as a punchline in his campaign speeches, painting me as a sentimental fool clinging to a dead man's useless dream. And the town, they laughed right along with him. What Bartholomew and the rest of Harmony Creek didn't know was what my grandfather had left me. It wasn't just land. It was a secret. Tucked inside his old leather-bound journal was a hand-drawn map. My grandfather, a quiet man who had studied geology before he ever planted a seed, had marked a single spot with a deep red X. His last letter to me said, "Tammy, the world is a thirsty place, and it's only going to get thirstier. When the sky forgets how to cry, this X will be the only tear the land has left." Everyone thought he was a crazy old man. I was the only one who believed him. Our divorce was quick and brutal. Bartholomew told me he needed a partner, not a project. He couldn't be married to the crazy dirt lady, as the town kids had started calling me. He left me for Melinda, a woman whose father owned the town bank and whose hands had never touched soil. In the divorce, he made sure to get the house, the savings, our life together. The only thing he didn't fight for was the farm. He gladly let me keep my useless patch of dirt. The day the papers were signed, I felt like my world had ended. I had lost my husband and my dignity. Then, the rain stopped. At first, nobody worried. It was just a hot summer, they said. But summer turned to fall, and the sky remained a bright, unforgiving blue. The town's lifeblood, Lake Harmony, began to shrink. The lush green fields of the surrounding farms turned yellow, then a brittle brown. The corn stalks, once standing tall and proud, withered into skeletons. The laughter in town grew quiet, replaced by the low hum of anxiety. The easy rhythm of our lives was broken, and a new, desperate beat began to take its place. The town council, led by Mayor Bartholomew Vance, held emergency meetings. He promised water trucks from the state, federal aid, and solutions that never arrived. Water rationing was put into effect. You could only water your gardens on Tuesdays, then not at all. People started hoarding bottled water, and fights broke out in the grocery store aisles. The town I knew, a place of friendly waves and summer barbecues, began to turn on itself. Fear is a terrible thing. It makes good people do ugly things. And everyone was very, very afraid. But not me. While their world turned to dust, mine turned green. I had taken every last cent from my divorce settlement and hired a drilling company. They thought I was crazy too, drilling in a field of rock and clay. But I showed them my grandfather's map. On the third day of drilling, they hit it. A roar echoed from deep within the earth as a geyser of pure, clean water shot 100 feet into the air. They had struck one of the largest underground aquifers in the state. My useless farm, powered by solar panels I'd installed, now had the only working well for 50 miles. And so there he stood, Bartholomew Vance, the great mayor, on the porch of the fool he had divorced. His expensive leather shoes were covered in the dust of the dying town he was supposed to save. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate shame that was almost painful to watch. He was the face of every person who had ever laughed at me, every friend who had turned their back, every neighbor who had whispered behind my back. They had all sent him here, their fallen king, to beg at the feet of the woman they had cast out. I let the silence stretch out, letting him bake under the heat of the afternoon sun. I watched a drop of sweat roll down his temple and disappear into his collar. He had come here for a miracle, for salvation. He thought he knew me, thought he could appeal to the soft-hearted woman he had married. But he was wrong. I looked past him, at the dusty road that led back to the town that had shattered my heart, and I finally spoke. My voice was calm and clear, without a trace of the tears I once shed for him. I asked him a simple question. Why should I? They thought my dream was a joke, but now their survival rests in my hands. What happens next will change Harmony Creek forever. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss Chapter 2. And we'd love to know where you're watching from today, so drop a comment below. Bartholomew's face crumpled. He expected me to yell, to cry, to list all the ways he had hurt me. My quiet, simple question, why should I? Was a wall he had no idea how to climb. He stammered, his confident mayor's voice gone. Tammy, please. Think of the town. Mrs. Gable in the nursing home. Her medicine needs to be mixed with clean water. The children. They're getting sick. He was trying to find the old Tammy, the one who baked cookies for the town bake sale, the one who would have given anything to feel needed. But he couldn't see that he, and the town, had killed that woman long ago. As I looked at him, I wasn't seeing the desperate mayor on my porch. I was seeing a memory from 3 years ago, at the Founders' Day picnic. I had spent days making my grandfather's famous peach jam, hoping it would be a small bridge back into the community. I set up my little table, my jars gleaming in the sun. Then Melinda, Bartholomew's new, perfect wife, walked past with her friends. She whispered something, and they all giggled. A moment later, one of her friends, Carol, tripped and knocked my entire table over. Jars shattered, and my hard work bled into the dirt. They all laughed. Bartholomew saw it. He looked right at me, kneeling in the broken glass, and simply turned away. That memory was why I felt no pity now. I looked straight into Bartholomew's pleading eyes and said, "The Tammy who cared about Mrs. Gable's medicine died the day her husband watched a whole town laugh at her." His face went pale. He finally understood that this was not a negotiation between old friends. It was a reckoning. He had come here expecting to find a pushover, a forgotten woman who would be grateful for the attention. He was starting to realize he had found a queen on her throne, and he had forgotten how to kneel. The game had changed, and he didn't even know the rules. I turned and walked back into my cool, quiet house, leaving the front door open. It was an invitation and a test. For a long moment, he remained on the porch, trapped between his pride and his desperation. Finally, with the heavy steps of a defeated man, he followed me inside. My home wasn't grand like the mayor's mansion he now shared with Melinda, but it was solid and peaceful. On my simple wooden table, my grandfather's journals were open. The page showed not just the map of the well, but strange drawings of weather patterns and notes about the town's history I had yet to understand. He glanced at the open journals, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer. He cleared his throat and switched back to the man who solved problems with money. "Listen, Tammy. The town council is prepared to make you a very generous offer. We can pay you for the water. Name your price. $1 million. 2. Just tell us what you want." He thought he could write a check and wash away years of cruelty. He still had no idea what this was truly about. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. $1 million? I asked, turning from the window where I had been watching a hawk circle high above my green fields. You think you can buy back a soul with paper, Bartholomew? You think money will make the ground give up its water? I walked toward him, my work boots silent on the wooden floor. My price is not something the town treasury can afford. I don't want your money. I want something you threw away a long time ago. I want your respect. And you're all going to pay for it, piece by piece. He looked utterly confused, like a man trying to read a language he'd never seen before. He was ready for a fight over numbers, not a battle for dignity. I laid out my first condition, my voice as cold and clear as the water beneath my feet. Here is my first payment. I want a public apology. Not from you. I want it from your wife, Melinda. I want her to stand in the town square and tell everyone she is sorry for being a cruel, thoughtless bully. Bartholomew looked like I had slapped him. He knew his wife. Her pride was the only thing bigger than her inheritance. Tammy, that's impossible, he pleaded. You know Melinda. She would never. She couldn't. He couldn't even finish the sentence. The idea of his perfect polished wife humbling herself before me, the town joke, was unthinkable. It would shatter the social order of Harmony Creek. I just smiled. It was a hard, sharp smile that didn't reach my eyes. Is it impossible? Or is it just difficult? People are thirsty, Bartholomew. Their children are thirsty. You need to decide what's more important, your wife's pride, or the life of this town. Before he could even process that, I added my second condition. The price was going up. And after she agrees, you will go to the town square. You will ring the old emergency bell, the one you only ring for fires or floods. You will gather every last person in this town. And when they are all standing there, looking at you for answers, you will tell them the truth. You will tell them that their mayor failed them, and that the only person who can save them is the crazy dirt lady living on Tammy's folly. Bartholomew swayed on his feet, his face ashen. I was asking him to do more than just admit defeat. I was asking him to tear down the very image of the strong, capable leader he had spent his entire life building. He would have to stand before the people who elected him and announce that the woman he had discarded and mocked was now their only hope. It was a humiliation from which his career, and his ego, might never recover. He stared at me, his eyes wide with horror and disbelief. The silence in the room was deafening. His choice was simple: utter ruin, or utter ruin. He finally opened his mouth to answer. Bartholomew's mouth opened, but only a choked sound came out. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for a different path, an easier way out. Tammy, no. Ask for anything else, he whispered, his voice cracking. I'll give you my own house, the mayoral title, anything. But don't ask me to do that. Don't ask me to destroy my wife, to destroy myself, in front of the whole town. It's too cruel. Even for you. He was trying to paint me as the monster, as if his years of mockery were just a simple mistake, and my demands were a crime. The word cruel echoed in the quiet room. It took me back to another time, another place where I was the one begging. A flashback hit me like a physical blow. I was standing in the Harmony Creek bank, my hands trembling as I slid a loan application across the polished desk. I only needed a few $1,000s for the solar panels that now powered my well. Melinda sat there, looking down at my application. She didn't even try to hide her smirk. We don't invest in fantasies, Tammy, she'd said, her voice loud enough for the whole bank to hear. Then she picked up a big red stamp and slammed it down on my papers. Denied. I blinked, the memory fading as I focused on Bartholomew's desperate face. When your wife laughed at me in that bank and stamped "denied" on my dream, was that not cruel? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. She didn't just deny me money, Bartholomew. She tried to deny me a future. She enjoyed it. She wanted me to fail. He flinched, his eyes darting away. He had no idea. He never bothered to ask about my struggles. He just saw the town joke, not the woman fighting to survive the world he had left her in. My demands weren't random. They were a debt being collected. I turned from him and walked back to the table, placing my hand on my grandfather's journals. You think this is just about water, don't you? I said, flipping to a page filled with old, faded ink and complex diagrams. You still don't understand what you're dealing with. My grandfather didn't just know where to find the water. He knew why it would disappear from everywhere else. He left a warning. I tapped the page. An open loop of curiosity, a new mystery for him to unravel. I had more than water. I had knowledge. I had the truth. A warning. Bartholomew repeated, taking a hesitant step closer. What are you talking about? I explained it to him in simple words a child could understand. My grandfather was a geologist. He had studied the very ground Harmony Creek was built on. He discovered that the town's founders, in their rush to build, had rerouted natural streams and damaged the underground water table. He wrote that the town's thirst for progress would one day make the land itself too thirsty to live on. He predicted this drought 50 years ago, right down to the decade. The color drained from Bartholomew's face. This wasn't a freak act of nature. This was a man-made disaster, a time bomb that had been ticking for half a century. He took his findings to the town council. I continued, my voice low and steady. He begged them to change their plans, to work with the land, not against it. Do you know what they did, Bartholomew? He shook his head, his eyes wide. They laughed him out of the room. They called him a crazy old man, just like you all called me a crazy dirt lady. This town's pride is what poisoned its future. He finally broke. The weight of his own foolishness, and the foolishness of generations before him, settled onto his shoulders. He sank into a nearby chair, his head in his hands. All his plans, all his political speeches about unforeseen problems, were lies. The problem had been foreseen. It had been documented. It had been ignored. The fight was gone from his eyes, replaced with a hollow emptiness. What do I do? He asked the floor. He wasn't the mayor asking for a deal. He was just a man asking for help. I showed no pity. My heart was a stone, hardened by too many tears. I repeated my terms, my voice like chipping ice. You will go home. You will look your wife in the eyes and you will tell her the price of her pride. Then you will go to the town square and you will pay the price of yours. There is no other way. I walked to my refrigerator, pulled out a single cold bottle of my crystal clear water, and handed it to him. For your walk back, I said. You look thirsty. He took the bottle without a word. His hand, which had signed so many important city documents, trembled as it wrapped around the simple plastic. He didn't even look at me as he stood up and walked out of my house, the screen door slamming shut behind him. I watched from the window as his car sped away, leaving a plume of brown dust in its wake. A tiny part of me felt a flicker of victory, but it was quickly replaced by a cold dread. He was a weak man ruled by a proud woman. What if they chose to let the town burn just to spite me? I stood at that window for a long time, watching the dust settle. The silence of my farm felt different now, heavier. Just as I turned to go back to my grandfather's journals, my eyes caught a new movement on the horizon. Another cloud of dust, this one bigger, angrier, moving much faster than Bartholomew's had. A sleek, black car I recognized all too well was racing down my private road. It skidded to a stop just feet from my porch. The driver's door flew open, and a woman stormed out. It was Melinda, her face a mask of pure rage. She was marching towards my front door, and she did not look like she was here to apologize. I saw the cloud of dust long before the car arrived, and I knew who it was. I didn't wait for her to knock. I opened my front door and stood on the threshold, blocking the way. Melinda slammed her car door and stomped towards me, her expensive heels sinking slightly into the dry soil. Her face was a storm cloud of anger. You listen to me, she hissed, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my face. This little game of yours is over. You will not ruin my husband. You will not try to humiliate me. You will give this town the water, or I will personally burn this pathetic farm to the ground. I let her words, full of poison and empty threats, fade into the vast, quiet air. I looked at her flushed face, her panting breaths, and I felt nothing but a cold, distant pity. When she was finally done, I gave her a small, polite smile. "Hello, Melinda," I said, my voice even and calm. "It's a hot day. You look thirsty. Would you like a glass of water?" My question was not an act of kindness. It was a weapon. It stripped away her power, ignored her rage, and reminded her that she had come to my house as a beggar, not a queen. Her face turned an even deeper shade of red. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "Do you have any idea who I am? My father owns the bank that owns this whole valley. My husband is the mayor. We will take this land from you. We'll get a court order. We'll say you're mentally unstable. We will get that water, and you will be left with nothing but more dirt." She was puffing herself up like a cornered animal, using the only weapons she had, her family name and her husband's power. But out here on my land, those weapons were useless. I simply shook my head. "The time for your threats is over, Melinda." I stepped back from the door, holding it open. "But you're right about one thing. You should know who you're dealing with. Come inside. There's something you need to see." It was a dare. A test of her courage against her curiosity. She hesitated, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. She knew it was a trap, but she couldn't stand not knowing what it was. After a tense moment, she lifted her chin and strode past me into my home, as if she were the one in charge. I led her to the old wooden table where my grandfather's journals lay open. She glanced at them with disgust. "Bartholomew told me about your grandfather's ridiculous stories," she scoffed. "More fantasies." I didn't reply. I just pointed to a specific page. This one had no maps of wells or drawings of rocks. It was a detailed history of the Harmony Creek Bank, her family's bank. "My grandfather didn't just study the earth," I said softly. "He studied the greedy men who walked on it. Men like your great-grandfather." I let her read. I watched her eyes scan the elegant, old-fashioned handwriting that described a dark secret. Nearly 100 years ago, during another long dry spell, her great-grandfather, the celebrated founder of the town bank, had cheated his neighbors. He promised them loans to survive, but the loans never came. Instead, he used their desperation to buy their dying farms for almost nothing. One of those farms had belonged to my family. Her family's dynasty was built on the stolen land and broken dreams of my ancestors. "That's a lie," she whispered, but her voice trembled. The details were too specific, the names too familiar. My grandfather had recorded it all. "Is it a lie?" I asked. "Or is it the real reason you feel entitled to everything? Your family has been drinking this land dry for a century, Melinda. You didn't earn your throne. You inherited one built on theft." She stood there, speechless, the ugly truth of her family's legacy laid bare on the pages of my grandfather's journal. The powerful Melinda Vance was nothing but the descendant of a common thief. Just then, a faint but clear sound drifted through the open window, carried on the dry wind. Dong, dong, dong. My heart leaped. It was the old emergency bell from the town square, a sound reserved for the gravest of disasters. Bartholomew had done it. He had actually done it. He was choosing to save the town over saving his own pride. Melinda heard it too. The look on her face was a sight I will never forget. It was the horrified, betrayed look of a queen who had just been abandoned by her king. She was completely and utterly trapped. Her threats were empty. Her family's honor was a lie. Her husband had just publicly surrendered to me on the town's center stage. All the power she had ever known had vanished in a single afternoon. She turned to me, her mask of fury finally cracking to reveal the terrified person underneath. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice small and broken. The fight was over. She was finally ready to pay. I looked her up and down, from her expensive shoes to her tear-filled eyes. The public apology she was meant to give now seemed too easy, too distant. This moment, right here, was where the real payment would be made. The apology in the square is for them, I said, my voice quiet but firm. This is for me. I walked over to the corner and picked up a large, empty metal bucket. I held it out to her. You want water for your town, Melinda? Fine. You can have it. But you're going to carry it. One bucket at a time. All the way back to town. Melinda stared at the heavy metal bucket as if I had handed her a live snake. Her perfectly manicured hands, accustomed to the soft leather of a designer handbag, hovered over the rusty handle. For a heartbeat, I saw a flash of the old fire in her eyes. I thought she might scream, or throw it at my feet in a final act of defiance. But then the distant sound of the town bell echoed across the valley again, a mournful dong that sounded like the death of her old life. With a shuddering breath that was half sob, half sigh, she took the bucket. I led her past the porch to the spigot that jutted out from the ground, the heart of my well system. I twisted the handle, and a powerful gush of clear, cold water roared out, a sound so beautiful and rare it felt like a miracle. The water hammered against the bottom of the bucket, filling it quickly. I turned off the tap and looked at Melinda. The bucket was now full, easily 40 pounds of life-giving weight. She bent her knees, her fancy dress hiking up awkwardly, and tried to lift it. She gasped, stumbling as the water sloshed over the rim, soaking her expensive Italian shoes in mud. I can't, she whimpered, looking up at me, her face a mess of tears and dust. I can't do this. It's too heavy. It's too far. For a moment, a flicker of the old Tammy wanted to feel sorry for her. But I quickly snuffed it out. Pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. You wanted water, I said, my voice flat and cold. This is the price. I started to turn away, but then an idea, sharp and clear, formed in my mind. Oh, and Melinda, I called out. Don't get too comfortable. This isn't a one-time payment. This is just the first installment. You will be back here, every morning at sunrise. And you won't be alone. I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked back into my house and shut the door, leaving her to face her task. From my window, I watched her take her first, faltering steps onto the long, dusty road that led back to town. Each step was a battle. Her arms shook, her back was already bowed, and she was forced to stop every few feet. It was a pathetic sight, yet it was also the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was the sight of justice. But as I watched, a hollow feeling began to grow in my chest. Revenge was not as sweet as I thought it would be. Seeking comfort, I opened my grandfather's journal to a page I had marked long ago. His words were not about maps or rocks, but about life. The land does not forget, he wrote. It keeps a record of every kindness and every cruelty. A debt owed to the earth must always be paid. Sometimes in dust, sometimes in sweat. I finally understood. He wasn't just leaving me water. He was leaving me a responsibility. This wasn't just about making them suffer. It was about making them understand the value of what they had lost. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message, an emergency alert sent to every resident in the county. The message was short and chilling. Mandatory township meeting. Town square. Now. My breath caught in my throat. Bartholomew was on the stage. He was keeping his promise. I imagined the scene. Hundreds of my former neighbors, their faces cracked with sunburn and worry, gathered before the man who had failed them. What would he say? How would they react when he spoke my name? The people who had whispered about me in the grocery store, the men who had laughed at me at the diner, the women who had turned their backs at the town picnic. They were all about to find out that the crazy dirt lady was now the most powerful person in their world. Would their pride be stronger than their thirst? Or would they finally be willing to kneel? The power had shifted completely. It was no longer a private battle. It was now me against the entire town of Harmony Creek. My mind raced ahead, planning my next steps. Melinda carrying a single bucket of water was just a performance, a symbol. It wouldn't save the town. They would need more. They would need a system. A new order. My grandfather's journals spoke of a second, smaller water source on the far side of my property. A reserve aquifer. A secret no one else knew. It was my insurance policy, my final card to play. The town would get my water, but they would get it on my terms, and they would learn the meaning of sweat. My strategic thoughts were shattered by the sputtering sound of an approaching engine. It wasn't a sleek sedan or a town vehicle. It was an old beat-up pickup truck that rattled and coughed its way up my driveway. The truck came to a stop, and the engine died with a pained groan. An old man, thin and frail, slowly climbed out. It was Mr. Abernathy, my fourth-grade science teacher, the only person besides my grandfather who had ever encouraged my curiosity. He had always been kind, always quiet. I hadn't spoken to him in years. Why was he here? He walked slowly up to my porch, clutching a worn-out hat in his hands. He didn't look desperate like Bartholomew, or angry like Melinda. He just looked sad. He stopped at the bottom step and looked up at me with weary, knowing eyes. "Tammy," he said, his voice raspy with age. "Your grandfather always said this day might come. He made me promise. If it did, I was to give you this." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, rust-covered metal box, holding it out for me to take. I stared at the rust-covered box in Mr. Abernathy's outstretched hands. It was small enough to hold in one palm, but it felt as heavy as a gravestone. 100 questions flooded my mind. Why did my grandfather leave this with him? Why not with me? I reached out and took it. The metal was cold against my warm skin, the rusted surface rough and sharp. "What is it?" I asked, my voice a strained whisper. Mr. Abernathy didn't answer directly. He just shook his head, his eyes filled with a deep, ancient sadness. He said you'd know what to do when the time was right. He also said, "It is both a key and a lock. Be careful which one you choose to turn." His words were a riddle wrapped in a warning. Before I could ask him to explain, he gently patted my arm. "Your grandfather was a very wise man, Tammy. He saw the poison in this town long before the wells ran dry. Don't let them make you like them." His message was clear. Don't let my quest for justice curdle into simple, cruel revenge. He gave me a final sad smile, then turned and walked back to his sputtering truck, leaving me alone on the porch with a new, terrifying mystery resting in the palm of my hand. I carried the box inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. I placed it on the table beside the open journals. It looked ancient, sealed shut by decades of rust. There was no keyhole, no obvious way to open it. I frantically flipped through my grandfather's journals, searching for a clue. Tucked into a hidden pocket in the back cover of his final journal, I found a small, brittle piece of paper. It showed a diagram of the box, pointing to a tiny, almost invisible latch on the bottom. Holding my breath, I found the latch and pushed. With a loud creak, the lid popped open. The air that escaped smelled of old paper and dust. Inside, resting on a cushion of faded red velvet, were two things. The first was a small glass vial, stoppered with a cork and filled with a liquid that looked exactly like water. The second was a thick, yellowed envelope, sealed with a circle of hard wax. Written on the front in my grandfather's looping script was a single word, Tammy. This wasn't a deed or a map. This was personal. This was his last secret, his final word. Just as I reached for the letter, my phone buzzed violently on the table, making me jump. The screen read, "Sheriff Brody." With a shaking hand, I answered. "Tammy, you need to hear this." Sheriff Brody's voice was tense. The sound of shouting was faint in the background. "It's a madhouse down here. The mayor did what you asked. He's on the stage at the town square, telling everyone you're their only hope. People are losing their minds. It's a full-blown riot." The private war I had started in my living room had finally exploded. "What are they saying?" I asked, my throat tight. "It's split," the sheriff said, his voice strained. "Half the crowd is begging, saying they'll do whatever you ask. But Melinda's father is up there with a megaphone, riling up the other half. He's yelling about seizing private property, saying you're holding the town hostage. He's telling them the law is on their side and they should come and take what is rightfully theirs. The town wasn't just begging for my help. A part of it was preparing to attack me. My blood ran cold. "Sheriff, are they coming here?" I asked. I heard him sigh. "They're talking about it, Tammy. A mob. Honestly, I've only got 2 deputies with me. If that crowd decides to march on your farm, I don't know if we can stop them." The threat was real. My quiet farm was no longer a sanctuary. It was a target. After he hung up, I looked down at the letter in my hand. It felt like my grandfather had known this exact moment would come. With trembling fingers, I broke the wax seal and unfolded the brittle paper. The letter was short, but the words on the page knocked the air from my lungs. "My dearest Tammy," it began. "If you are reading this, then the day I always feared has come. The main well is a miracle, but it is not the true gift I left you. This is." He explained that the vial was not just water. It was a sample he took from the main aquifer 50 years ago, the day he first found it. The letter continued, each word a heavier weight upon my heart. "The water has a secret, my child. Our bloodline carries a rare immunity to it, but for others, it is a slow poison. Not to their bodies, but to the land itself. The unique minerals in the water, the very thing that helps it resist evaporation, will slowly build up in the soil. Within a few years, any land watered by it will become barren. It will be unable to grow crops. The water will save them from thirst, only to condemn them to famine." My grandfather's final words were the heaviest burden of all. "The second smaller well I marked on the other map draws from a pure, clean source. It is the town's only true future, but it is small. It can sustain life, but not the greedy way they have lived. They can't have both. The choice is yours. Give them the big well and let them drink freely, knowing their land will die, or force them to live humbly with the small well, saving their future by sacrificing their greed. The contents of this box are the key to their salvation, or the lock on their doom." As I read the last line, I heard it. The distant sound of angry shouts and revving engines, growing louder and louder. The mob was coming for me, and I had to choose. The roar of the mob was no longer a distant threat. It was a physical force, shaking the floorboards of my house. They were here. My grandfather's letter felt like a burning coal in my hand. He had left me with an impossible choice. Offer them a quick salvation that would lead to a slow, certain death, or a difficult path that could lead to true survival. Fear coiled in my stomach, but something else rose to meet it. A cold, hard clarity. My quest for revenge felt small now. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a judge, and the town of Harmony Creek was on trial before me. A dozen pairs of headlights cut through the growing darkness, painting my quiet home in a harsh, interrogating glare. Trucks and cars blocked my driveway, and from them spilled a crowd of 50 or more people. Their faces, once familiar, were twisted into masks of desperation and anger. They carried flashlights like searchlights, and some held tools, shovels, wrenches, tire irons, that looked like weapons in the pale light. They stopped at my simple wooden fence, a restless mob of my former neighbors, ready to tear down the woman they had once thrown away. A path parted in the crowd, and a large man strode to the front. Alastair Sterling, Melinda's father, a man who wore his wealth and power like a crown. Tonight, his crown was tilted and his kingdom was on fire. He raised a megaphone to his lips, and his voice, artificially loud and ugly, boomed across my property. "Tammy begs. Your game is over. You will connect your well to the town pipeline immediately, or we will come onto your property and do it ourselves. That water is now a public utility." I took a deep breath, tucked the letter and the vial into my pocket, and walked out onto my porch. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I stood there, letting the headlights illuminate me, letting them all see that I was not afraid. My silence seemed to unnerve them more than any shouting could have. "There is no pipeline to connect to, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice calm and clear in the night air. "My farm was never a part of your town. My well is not a part of your broken system." A wave of confusion rippled through the crowd. They had believed it would be easy, that they could just flip a switch and life would go back to normal. The realization that salvation required more than a simple command quieted them for a moment. "Then give us the water," a man yelled from the back. "We'll bring buckets. We'll do whatever it takes." The mob roared in agreement. They were still looking for an easy answer. They had no idea what kind of choice was truly before them. "I will share the water," I called out, and I could feel the tension in the crowd instantly ease. A few people even cheered. I held up my hand. "But it will be on my terms. And it will not be from the well you think." My grandfather knew this day would come. He knew this town's greed. He knew that one well would never be enough to fix what is truly broken here. A new mystery hung in the air. A second well. I had their complete, undivided attention. "The water you are ready to fight for," I continued, my voice ringing with the terrible truth of my grandfather's secret. "The water from the big well is a lie. It will save you from thirst, yes. But it is a poison to the soil. In 5 years, nothing in this valley will ever grow again. You will trade a drought for a famine." The crowd erupted in angry shouts and accusations. "She's lying," Alastair Sterling bellowed into his megaphone. "It's a trick. She wants to keep it all for herself." "Am I shouted back, pulling the small glass vial from my pocket and holding it high. It glittered in the headlights like a diamond. "This is a sample of that water, taken 50 years ago. I have my grandfather's scientific journals to prove it. Are you willing to bet your children's lives on the word of a man whose family got rich by stealing land from his neighbors?" Mr. Sterling's face went white with fury. The crowd grew quiet again, caught between my impossible story and a truth about his family they didn't want to believe. "There is another way," I told them, my voice softening. "There is a second well. The water is pure. It will not harm the land. But it is small. It will be enough to drink, to cook, to survive. It will not be enough to water your lawns or fill your swimming pools. It is enough for a new beginning, but you will have to live differently. Humbly." I stood there on my porch, offering them 2 futures, an easy death or a difficult life. The crowd was torn, arguing amongst themselves, a town at war with itself. Just as Mr. Sterling lifted his megaphone to spew more poison, a figure stumbled out of the darkness behind the line of trucks. The person was caked in mud, their clothes were in tatters, and they were carrying a heavy, sloshing bucket. It was Melinda. She had walked the entire 5 miles. Ignoring the shocked face of her father, she staggered to my fence and collapsed to her knees, the bucket tipping over and spilling precious water into the dust. She looked up at me, her face a mess of dirt and tears. "I did it," she gasped. Tell them the truth." The sight of Melinda, the town's untouchable queen, kneeling in the dirt at my fence was like a lightning strike on a clear day. It silenced the mob instantly. All their anger, all their certainty, vanished in that single shocking moment. Her journey, the 5 miles of sweat and pain, was a truth more powerful than any speech. Alastair Sterling's megaphone fell from his hand, clattering on the ground. He stared at his daughter, his face a mask of pure horror. In that moment, he wasn't a leader anymore. He was just a father watching his world crumble. He lunged toward the fence line, his voice a venomous whisper. "Melinda, get up. What is the meaning of this?" He tried to grab her arm, but she pulled away. "You're making a fool of yourself," he hissed. He turned to the crowd, his face desperate. "She's hysterical. She doesn't know what she's saying." But his words were empty. Melinda looked past him, her eyes finding mine. "It's true," she said, her voice raspy but clear. "I saw the journals. The proof is real. We have to listen to her." Her words were the final nail in her father's coffin of lies. The crowd stood silent, a sea of confusion. Then, one man stepped forward. It was old George, a farmer whose fields bordered mine. He was a man who had laughed heartily at every joke made at my expense. He nervously took off his hat, twisting it in his hands. "Ma'am," he said, and the word felt strange coming from him. "If what you're both saying is true, then what are we supposed to do now?" He wasn't challenging me. He was asking for help. The mob that had come to destroy me was now asking me to lead them. I looked out at their faces, one by one. I saw the fear. I saw the exhaustion. And I saw a tiny flicker of something new. Hope. The fire of my own anger had finally burned out, leaving behind not ash, but the heavy weight of duty. "The choice you have to make is bigger than just water," I said, my voice carrying over the silent crowd. "It's about who you want to be. Will you be the people who take the easy path that leads to ruin? Or will you be the people who do the hard work to build a future?" I let the question sink in. "The pure water from the smaller well is a gift," I continued. "But it is a gift that must be earned. It will not be piped into your homes for you to waste. We will build a new well, a community well, in the center of town. Everyone will carry what they need. Every single day. No one is above the work. No one is better than their neighbor." I was offering them survival, but I was also demanding they sacrifice the pride and selfishness that had poisoned their town in the first place. A wave of murmurs and gasps swept through the crowd. The future I described was hard, a life of shared labor they had never known. "It seems impossible," I said, "but my grandfather left more than just warnings." I held up one of the journals for them to see. He left plans. He drew blueprints for a town that could live with the land, not against it. He knew how to survive. The only question is, are you willing to learn? The journals were no longer my secret. They were the town's last hope. Suddenly, another set of headlights cut through the darkness. A car door slammed. It was Bartholomew. He ran towards the scene, his face pale with panic. He saw the crowd, his furious father-in-law, and finally, his wife, still kneeling in the dirt. He rushed to her side. "Melinda. My God, are you hurt?" He tried to help her up, but she gently pushed his hand away. "I'm not hurt, Bartholomew," she said, her voice steady and clear. "For the first time in a very long time, I think I'm okay." Bartholomew looked utterly lost, a captain on a ship that was sinking beneath his feet. He looked from his transformed wife to the silent crowd, and finally to me. "Tammy," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "What is happening here?" I looked down at the disgraced mayor, not with scorn, but with a new sense of purpose. "I've simply told them the truth, Bartholomew. Now, after all your empty promises, it's finally time for you to actually lead." He was confused. "Lead how? What can I possibly do now?" I raised my voice so the entire town could hear my decree. "This town needs to build a new well. They need a leader to organize the work, to dig the first shovel of dirt. The mayor should be the first to serve his people, shouldn't he? So you, Bartholomew Vance, will lead the construction. But you will not lead with speeches. You will lead with a shovel. You will work beside your neighbors until the job is done." All eyes turned to him. It was a path to redemption, but it was paved with mud and sweat. He could refuse and be remembered as a coward, or he could accept and be reborn as a true leader. As he stood there, frozen and speechless, another figure pushed through the crowd. It was Mr. Abernathy, the old teacher. He was holding a single yellowed page from my grandfather's journal. "Before you make your decision, Mayor," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice surprisingly strong, "there is one more thing you all need to see. This is your town's original founding charter. Your first law." All eyes in the crowd fixed on the frail yellowed paper in Mr. Abernathy's hands. He held it with a reverence that silenced everyone. "Your grandfather found this 50 years ago, hidden in the town archives," he said, his voice ringing with a strange authority. "This is the Harmony Creek Charter, the first page of our laws." Alistair Sterling scoffed, a desperate, ugly sound. "A piece of paper from a dead time. It's meaningless." Mr. Abernathy looked at him with profound pity. A town that forgets its founding laws, he said softly, is a town that has already died. He took a deep breath and began to read. He didn't just read the words, he gave them life. He spoke of the founder's promise to build a community of equals, to face hardship as one. Then, he arrived at the final binding law, and his voice grew strong. Article 4, he read, his words echoing in the night. In times of fire, flood, or great drought, all private stores of water, food, and lumber shall be considered held for the common good, to be shared equally among all. The needs of the many shall always outweigh the wealth of the few. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Their own law was my greatest defender. The charter was a thunderclap that shattered Alastair Sterling's world. His entire argument about private property was an act of treason against the town's own soul. The crowd slowly turned to face him, their expressions shifting from fear to a cold, hard anger. He had played on their desperation, but he had been arguing against the very rule that was meant to save them. He wasn't their champion. He was just another greedy man, no different from his thieving great-grandfather. Sterling's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. That's an ancient rule. It doesn't apply, he sputtered, but his voice was thin and weak. He had lost them. George, the farmer, spoke for everyone, his voice full of shame. My own grandpappy used to talk about that law. He said we had forgotten who we were. I never listened. He looked around at the faces of his neighbors, illuminated by the headlights. He was right. We all forgot. The town was waking up from a long and terrible dream of selfishness. With the law of the past now lighting the way forward, every single person turned to look at Bartholomew. The choice was no longer just about his pride. It was about his duty. He could either uphold the town's most sacred law or break it forever. He looked at me on the porch, then at the charter in Mr. Abernathy's hands. He looked at his wife Melinda, who was now being helped to her feet by another woman. Her face was dirty, her dress was ruined, but her eyes were strong. Melinda walked to her husband's side. She didn't say a word. She simply reached out and placed her hand on his arm. It was a small act, but it was everything. It was forgiveness. It was a promise. It was the beginning of a new chapter, for both of them. Bartholomew looked down at her hand, and it was as if her touch broke something hard and brittle inside him. The years of lies, the empty ambition, the hollow pride, it all crumbled away, leaving behind just a man who had lost his way. He finally turned to face his people, his eyes clear for the first time. We have been fools, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. He then looked directly at me. And I was the biggest fool of all. I was so ashamed of honest work that I threw away the most honest thing I ever had. He walked to the edge of the porch, took off his expensive mayor's jacket, and dropped it into the dust. A leader is a servant, he declared. Now, who has a shovel? A stunned silence gave way to a wave of cheers and applause. It wasn't loud or angry, but quiet and hopeful. A young man ran to his truck and returned with a shovel, handing it to Bartholomew. He gripped the wooden handle, a tool far more foreign to him than any pen or gavel. The work begins at dawn, he announced. In the town square. We will build our future with our own hands. He was no longer a politician. He was a man ready to serve. The angry mob was gone, replaced by a community with a shared purpose. As people began to leave, filled with a new, weary resolve, Alastair Sterling got into his expensive car and drove away, a disgraced king fleeing a fallen kingdom. A new day was dawning, one of hard work and fragile hope. My long, lonely fight was over. Or so I thought. The next morning, the sun rose over a town reborn. The people of Harmony Creek gathered in the square, ready to work. I arrived with my grandfather's journals, carrying the blueprints for the new well. I unrolled the large hand-drawn map on a table for all to see. But as I looked at the familiar drawing, a cold dread seized me. In the margin, in my grandfather's shaky, fading handwriting, was a note I had never seen before. The new well site is perfect, but the ground is unstable. To dig safely, The foundation must be braced with the town's original cornerstone. Its location has been lost for over a century. My grandfather's final words fell like a death sentence on the hopeful crowd. A cornerstone, lost for a century. After all the battles we had won, we were to be defeated by a single missing stone. A wave of despair rippled through the square, a collective sigh of exhaustion. "Then it's over," someone whispered from the back. "After all this, we're lost." Bartholomew stared at the shovel in his hands, the symbol of their new beginning, now looking like a useless toy. The fragile hope that had united them was beginning to crumble into dust. But before the despair could take root, a new voice cut through the silence. It was Melinda. She stepped forward, her face dirty but her eyes shining with a fierce, newfound strength. "No," she said, her voice clear and steady. "We are not lost. We have just been looking for answers in all the wrong ways. We have tried to fix this with anger and with money. Maybe it's time we tried to fix it with memory." She turned away from me and faced the crowd, her people. "What are the stories your grandparents told you? What did this place look like before the big bank, before the fancy fountain?" Her question was a spark in the darkness. It shifted the energy from hopeless waiting to active searching. Mr. Abernathy's eyes lit up. "The cornerstone would have been part of the very first public building," he said, thinking aloud. "The original town hall?" An old woman in the crowd shook her head. "No, my grandmother said the first meetings were held in the open air, under the old founder's oak." George the farmer snapped his fingers. "The founder's oak. My grandpappy said they cut it down to build the fountain in the square. The old, dry fountain. A monument to a time of wasteful vanity, now a cracked and ugly centerpiece to their suffering." Bartholomew looked at the fountain, and a look of pure revelation crossed his face. "It wasn't just a fountain," he said, his voice filled with awe. "It was built on top of the original town well. The first one that ever went dry." A stunned silence fell over the square. Could it be that simple? Could the foundation of their future be buried under the rubble of their most foolish mistake? There was no more debate. There was only action. Led by Bartholomew, the people of Harmony Creek swarmed the concrete fountain. With sledgehammers, crowbars, and their bare hands, they began to tear down the symbol of their arrogance. The looming shadow of Alastair Sterling's bank seemed to watch them with disapproval, but for the first time, no one cared about its power. They worked as one, men and women, young and old, a joyful chaos of destruction and discovery, tearing away the ugly present to find the beautiful past. After hours of work, a sledgehammer struck something with a deep, ringing sound that was not concrete. They frantically cleared away the dust and debris. And there it was. A massive, square-cut block of granite, its surface worn smooth by time. Carved into the stone were simple words: Harmony Creek. What we share is more valuable than what we own. 1888. It was the cornerstone. A cheer erupted from the crowd, a raw, primal sound of victory that echoed off the hills. They had found their heart. The rest is a story of sweat and quiet miracles. With my grandfather's blueprints as their guide and the cornerstone as their foundation, they built the new well. I was no longer their enemy or their queen. I was their guide, sharing the wisdom I had learned from the journals. Bartholomew, caked in mud and sweat, found a dignity he had never known as mayor. Melinda, organizing the work crews and food supplies, found a purpose she had never found in her wealth. They weren't just building a well. They were rebuilding their town from the very first stone. Months later, I stand on my porch, looking out at a valley transformed. Harmony Creek is a quieter place now. The lawns are brown, but the shared community gardens are bursting with life. The people are a little thinner, but their eyes are brighter. Every morning, they gather at the new well in the square, buckets in hand. It is not a chore. It is a ritual. It is their daily promise to each other, a reminder of the price of water, and the value of community. Bartholomew and Melinda visit me often. They don't bring apologies anymore. They bring vegetables from their garden and stories of the town's rebirth. My quest for revenge is a distant memory, a ghost that has finally found peace. My grandfather's true gift was never the water. It was the drought. It was the hardship that forced a broken town, and a broken woman, to remember how to live. The land is healing, and so are we. The story of Harmony Creek proves that even when things seem hopeless, we can find the strength to rebuild, to forgive, and to grow. It reminds us that the most valuable things in life aren't what we own, but what we share. If this story moved you, please help us spread this message of hope. Click the like button, share this video with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that can change the world, one heart at a time. Thank you for watching.